Hello, everyone, and welcome into the Star Wars Legends Lounge, the show that celebrates the books from Star Wars Legends. I'm Aaron Motes. Han and Leia are on the run from both the Galactic Alliance and the Corellians. Not only are they being hunted by Lumaya and Alima Rar, but also by their son Jason. It's Exile by Aaron Alston, book number 4 in the Legacy of the Force series. And joining me to talk about the book, and the only Toronto Blue Jays fan that's allowed on the show, is my buddy Jay. How you doing today, Jay?
I'm doing really well, Aaron. How are you?
I'm doing okay. Listener, if you are a North American sports fan at all, you know that we're about to start the best month of the year, October. We got the NFL, the CFL, college football, they're all in full swing. The NBA and NHL are about to begin. But the most important thing of all in October is the Major League Baseball postseason. Now, you all know from the amount of whining that I have done on the show this year that the Baltimore Orioles were pretty bad. They did not make the postseason. However, the Toronto Blue Jays won the American League East this season. So, Jay, what's it been like to watch a good baseball team in 2025? And how do you think your Jays are going to fare in the playoffs?
I've got to say, it's been a pretty exciting year for the Jays. I've really enjoyed watching baseball this year, though September baseball has definitely been September baseball. The Jays looked like they were kind of choking a little bit for the last couple of weeks, but they've managed to pull it out. So that was pretty exciting. It came down to the last game of the year.
There were some nervous times there.
There really was, especially because they had a significant lead over the Yankees, and yeah, it literally came down to the last game of the year.
Well, I'm not going to lie, Jay, and say that I'll be rooting for Toronto in the postseason, but I'll be happy to see them win if they happen to come up against the Yankees or the Red Sox.
I'm glad to hear that. I was actually cheering for the Orioles all this weekend, hoping that they'd beat the Yankees. So
Oh no, we got swept.
that's really unfortunate. I was really hoping Baltimore would pull that one out.
All right, Jay, enough sports talk. That's not what the people are here to listen to. Let's start the show, and we'll start with some listener questions. We have 2 emails today. The first one comes from Mark, who wrote a very nice email, but it was a little long. I had to trim it down a bit for the show. Mark says, "Hello, Aaron. Thank you for creating the Star Wars Legends Lounge podcast. A few years ago, I started a longer commute to work and wondered if there were any podcasts covering the novels of the Star Wars EU. I came across your podcast and I was immediately hooked. I'm excited that you're covering the Legacy of the Force series. You and a few guests have said the Force seems to do whatever it needs to in Legends, and I don't disagree. But what are your thoughts about how much mind manipulation we see by Force users in Legends compared to canon? In the Legacy of the Force series alone, Jason memory rubs Ben multiple times. Also, a Force user can make others believe an attack is imminent or completely hide their presence in the Force to security cameras. I feel like these abilities aren't utilized much in the movies, besides Obi-Wan saying, 'These aren't the droids you're looking for,' and 'You don't want to sell me death sticks, you want to go home and rethink your life.' What do you think of the other manipulative uses of the Force in the EU? And are there examples from canon where the Force is used in this manner?" Well, Jay, what do you think about how the Force is used? We'll start with Legends and how it's used to manipulate either people or manipulate objects.
So one of the things I love about Legends is actually how the Force is used in different ways and how each individual has sort of their strengths and weaknesses. And I think this series really um, shows us that, Jason, Ali Marar, Lumaya kind of have those. Um, this is one of their strong suits of mind manipulation and uh, being almost invisible to seeing people. Um, I'm also reminded of like I Jedi, where Corran Horn kind of says he's no good at moving things with the Force. And it's actually one of those things I love about Legends, where you do see sort of that variety. And even with Jason's training, different societies have adapted using the Force in different ways.
So I will say I agree with the majority of what you said, Jay. I do like how in Legends we see different Force users use the Force differently. Personally, I've always thought that some of the stuff with mind manipulation borders on the dark side of the Force. Now, I know that a lot of the Jedi will teach that intent and your emotional state when you're using the Force dictates as to whether it is light side or dark side. But for me, either altering someone's memories, like we see Jason do to Ben, or the most heinous use, in my opinion, in this series is Jason obviously trying to force his way into Aylin's mind during the interrogation, in which he ends up killing her. Alima, we see her manipulate the cameras wherever she is so that they can't see her. That one I don't really have that much of an issue with, but I think some of the mind manipulation things, to me, even the stuff that Obi-Wan does in the films, yeah, his are a little more surface level. So I guess I don't have as big of an issue with that. But to me, I could see where it's a slippery slope. It could be a path toward opening yourself up to the dark side of the Force.
Well, I agree, and I think that's one of the things in this series that we're really seeing is the use of the Force as dark side powers. I would sort of equate this as a difference between like telling a little white lie versus a full blown, you know, backstory lie to get out of something, right? Is a little white lie inherently bad? Maybe. If you're actually lying and cheating your way through things, that's usually pretty bad.
So, your second part of the question there, Mark, about are there examples from canon where the Force is used in this manner? I have not read all of the canon books. I've probably read about half of them that are published right now. I haven't really read any of the comics. The only one for me, it is an example of what I'm talking about, how it's a slippery slope toward the dark side, is in the first episodes of the third season of Rebels. If you are familiar with that animated show, the first two episodes of season 3, Ezra is more militaristic. You can see Ezra dabbling in the dark side of the Force, and there is a moment with some ATSTs. I believe our rebels are getting attacked by 2 ATSTs, where Ezra influences the mind of one of the ATST drivers, and that driver then turns and fires on the other ATST. So he's forcing himself into that driver's mind. That's really the only example that I can think of from the parts of canon that I have experienced. So, Mark has another question on his email, and it's related specifically to the Legacy of the Force series. He asks, do you know where I can read about the years that Jason Solo spent studying with the Ang-T? It sounds interesting, but I haven't found any stories about it. Well, Mark, I can tell you I did a little bit of research for this part of your email, and from everything I can find, no. There are no written accounts of the 5 years that Jason Solo spends exploring the galaxy, training and studying with some of the different types of Force users following the events of the new Jedi Order. There are several places where his journey is talked about, but it's after the fact. There's nothing that I have found, and listeners, if any of you know if I am incorrect here, please let me know. But from what I have found, there are no comics, short stories, there's definitely no books about the 5 years that Jason spends searching the galaxy, studying different Force users following the new Jedi Order. So, sorry I can't answer that any better for you, Mark, but thank you very much for your email.
Today's second email comes from Sam, who says, "Hi, Aaron. I just finished your video on Republic Commando Order 66 and wanted to pick your brain about the clone inhibitor chips. You said that you prefer the inhibitor chip plotline in canon, but I disagree. It doesn't seem consistent to me. When Rex and his men receive Order 66, they all obey Rex's orders to stand down from shooting Ahsoka. But Rex is the only one who seems to be no longer in control of his body. Makes it seem like the chip is more of a body controller than a mind controller for Rex. However, it doesn't seem to affect his men the same way. Am I missing something, or am I right to say this is a bit inconsistent?"
Well, thank you very much for the email, Sam. I think this is just one of those instances from Obi-Wan Kenobi that says it's your point of view. I do not find it inconsistent. I think it is narratively more interesting because Rex has such a close relationship to Ahsoka. I think you are seeing Rex trying to fight Order 66 because he knows what he is supposed to do, but he doesn't want to do it. I think the reason we only see it from Rex is because of how close he is with Ahsoka. So, is it inconsistent? My answer is maybe. Do I think it works better narratively for the story, for dramatic effect? Yes.
So my take on it is, I was late coming to Clone Wars and everything that happened there. But I remember back when they were writing the stories between Attack of the Clones and Revenge of the Sith. When Order 66 happened, I can't remember her name, the blue Twi'lek Jedi.
Oh, shoot. You asked me too quick. I'll look it up. You just keep talking. I'll look it up.
Yeah.
But I know her name too.
Anyway, she there is actually a comic out there where when Order 66 happens, her legion that she was in command of couldn't bring themselves to shoot her because she was one of the few Jedi that actually led from the front and had such immense respect for her that they technically followed their orders. They shot her with stun blasts instead of the killing blaster shots, and then left her on, I believe it was Felucia, to find her way in the galaxy. So I don't necessarily find that it's inconsistent that Rex was struggling with the inhibitor programming, for lack of a better word, when he had that very similar relationship with Ahsoka, with Anakin, and several other Jedi commanders. I think the idea of a biological chip that is essentially making a Manchurian candidate, it's kind of interesting. But again, that was something that came later, so when they retcon things, sometimes it does create some inconsistencies.
Listener, don't think that I did not look that up. It's Ayla Sakura.
Yeah, I'm kicking myself for not knowing that either.
Oh, so. I knew her name. I just I
I
couldn't
did
think of it
too, and
right
I
there in a
just
second.
drew a blank on it. So
Thanks again for the question, Sam. Now, listener, if you have a question for the show, you can send me an email at swlegendslounge@gmail.com or send me a message on Twitter, Instagram, or Blue Sky at swlegendslounge. And if you'd like to get your voice on the show, you can record a short message and email it in. But please record it in MP3 audio format. Stick around for the end of the show where we'll hear from Mark again as he sent in his ideal Star Wars road trip crew to share with everyone. But now it's time for today's book, Exile by Aaron Alston, the fourth book in the Legacy of the Force series. Listener, grab yourself a drink and let's head in to the Star Wars Legends Lounge.
the story begins in the Corellian system. A band of smugglers tries to sneak through the Galactic Alliance blockade, but the smugglers are betrayed by their leader, Captain Levant. Jason Solo pays Levant a hefty sum for turning in these smugglers. But before Levant is able to leave, Jason secretly orders his mechanics to sabotage her hyperdrive, stranding Levant in space. That should teach her to betray her comrades.
On Coruscant, Luke, Mara, and Kip Duran meet with Chief Omas and Admiral Neothal. Omas asks Luke why Jason hasn't been promoted to the rank of Jedi Master yet. Jason was a hero of the Yuuzhan Vong War and the Killik Crisis, and he's clearly one of the most powerful Jedi in the Order. Luke and Mara say that Jason isn't ready. His decision-making has been especially reckless recently. But Omas and Neothal believe that promoting Jason to Jedi Master will strengthen public support of the war by reinforcing the ties between the Jedi Order and the Galactic Alliance. After the meeting, Kip tells Luke and Mara that he too believes Jason should be elevated to a Master. The three Jedi decide to bring the issue up to the full Jedi Council for discussion.
Back on Corellia, Jason meets with Wedge to discuss terms for ending the war. Jason demands Corellia's surrender. Wedge says he can recommend to his bosses that Corellia should rejoin the Alliance, but only if Chief Omas can guarantee that Corellia won't be forced to pay absurd reparations for the war or face economic sanctions. Later, after Wedge returns to the planet's surface, he meets with the Prime Minister, Gedjin, and other top government officials. Wedge is angry. He chastises the officials for their roles in assisting the usurpers at the Battle of Hapes and supporting the plot to assassinate Queen Mother Teneel Ka. When Wedge finishes speaking, Gedjin removes him as the Supreme Commander of the Corellian forces and promotes Admiral Gina Gelpin to the position. Wedge leaves the conference room agreeing to deliver a farewell address to the public, but knowing he needs to get off Corellia before Gedjin sends his assassins for his family and himself.
Han and Leia head to the planet Jindyne, where they meet up with Lando Calrissian. After Lando has his mechanics repair the damage done to the Millennium Falcon at the Battle of Hapes, the three friends head back to Corellia, incognito, on one of Lando's space yachts. They set up a meeting with one of Dur Gedjin's officials, a man named Tepler, who isn't happy with some of the decisions Gedjin is making. Tepler says it was Gedjin himself who approved the plan to overthrow Teneel Ka and the Hapan government. Tepler hands over proof of Gedjin's crimes, and then, suddenly, they're attacked by Corellian police. Leia cuts a hole in the floor with her lightsaber, and the four escape. Tepler sneaks off back to the Corellian Senate building, while Leia, Han, and Lando race back to the spaceport.
At the same time that our heroes are meeting with Tepler, Wedge is ambushed on the street by what appear to be a pair of Jedi Knights wielding lightsabers. They're not Jedi, of course, but two of Gedjin's assassins. Wedge avoids their strikes and rolls out into traffic, blasting one of the assassins from beneath a speeder. Before the second attacker can reach him, Wedge is rescued by his wife and youngest daughter. The three meet up with Corrin and Mirix at Alma Spaceport. Right as Leia, Han, and Lando arrive with Corellian security in hot pursuit. The two parties blast off the surface and team up to escape the Galactic Alliance blockade in orbit. Mirix contacts her father, Booster Tarek, and the entire gang heads for the errant venture.
Jason decides it's time to test Ben, to see if the teenager has what it takes to become his apprentice when Jason becomes a Sith Lord. Jason sends Ben to Drua, a moon orbiting the planet Almania, to retrieve the Amulet of Kalara, an ancient artifact that supposedly allows a Force user to become invisible. But when Ben arrives on Almania, he discovers the amulet isn't there. Someone else stole it first. But luckily, suspiciously luckily, a thief named Fascus left a note saying they took the amulet to the planet Ziost. Ben steals a Y-Wing and an astromech droid, an R2 unit named Shaker, and heads off to Ziost in pursuit of Fascus and the amulet.
Marooned in space, Captain Levant gets some help from a surprising source, Alima Rar. The Dark Jedi stowed away in Levant's cargo ship when she left the Anakin Solo, and she witnessed Jason's mechanics sabotage Levant's hyperdrive. Alima says she'll show Levant what she needs to fix it, if the captain will agree to take the Twi'lek and find Leia Organa Solo. Levant agrees, and Alima tracks Leia's Force presence to the errant venture, at the edge of the Corellian system. Booster is using the traveling casino to entertain the GA forces in the system on their days off. It's the perfect cover for Leia, Han, Lando, Wedge's wife Ayala, and daughter Miri to gather intelligence about what the GA is planning for Corellia, and it's the perfect place for Alima Rar to hunt for Leia.
Ben arrives at Ziost and immediately finds the man who stole the Amulet of Kalara. But the scene is not what he expected. Fascus is mortally wounded, his ship shot down by a TIE fighter, and the man's young daughter is there, a girl named Kiara. Shortly after Ben arrives at their camp, Fascus dies from his injuries. Ben takes the amulet and initially heads back to his Y-Wing, but his conscience gets to him. He can't leave Kiara alone out here in the wilderness. Ben returns to the camp and tells Kiara to come with him. He'll take the girl back to Almania and find somewhere safe for her. Ben, Kiara, and Shaker head back to Ben's Y-Wing and arrive just as the TIE fighter returns and blows the ship to bits.
Jason arrives on the errant venture to mingle with his troops during their recreation time. Jason is shocked to find Captain Levant in one of the casinos. He expected the smuggler to be stranded forever. But since the woman survived, Jason sees an opportunity. Something a smuggler is uniquely qualified to do. With Bothawi and Commoner declaring for Corellia, GA intelligence says rebels are planning to elect a new supreme military commander. But they don't know where the meeting is taking place. Jason wants Levant to use her skills to find out.
Ben and Kiara need to find a way off Ziost, and that means finding a new ship. The two children walk for days. Occasionally, they can hear the TIE fighter searching for them, but they're able to use the trees to avoid detection, for the most part. Still, they're short on food and water, and they're being followed by some of the local predators. The situation looks bleak. But then, something strange happens. Ben starts to hear a voice, a dark voice, telling him to kill the girl and save himself. Ben refuses and tries to ignore the voice, but eventually he begins talking to it, following it to a remote, dark mountain. Inside, Ben, Kiara, and Shaker find a huge, dark pit. The voice in Ben's head grows louder and louder, until a small, strange, red-orange ship rises out of the pit. the ship invites Ben on board. There are no seats or controls. But when Ben tells the ship where he wants to go, it rises off the planet. Ben drops Kiara and Shaker back on Almania and then heads to Coruscant with the amulet and the ship.
On Coruscant, Jagged Fell arrives at the Jedi Temple. He tells Luke about the 2 years he spent stranded on Tanupe and his quest to find Ali Marar. Luke decides to set up a task force to help Jag, and of course, he assigns Jaina and Zek to it. It's an awkward situation. Both men have feelings for Jaina, but Jaina doesn't want romance. She's the sword of the Jedi. The Force told Luke that Jaina would never know peace, and she'd always stand alone. When Jaina says she still doesn't know what being the sword of the Jedi means, Jag says a sword is a weapon. Maybe her destiny will be as a weapon against the Sith.
Leia and the others on the errant venture discover evidence that Lumaya is manipulating events between Corellia, their allies, and the Galactic Alliance. But why? When Luke and Mara arrive, Leia tells her brother that they have evidence that Lumaya had a daughter named Brisha Sayo. It was Brisha who took Jason, Ben, and Nalani Din to the asteroid in the Bimial system. Maybe when Ben thought he was fighting a phantom version of Mara, he was actually attacking Brisha and killed her. That must be why Lumaya is here, Mara says. She wants revenge because Ben killed her daughter.
Jag develops a way to search for Ali Marar. He writes a computer program that tracks security camera glitches, one of the force powers Ali Marar uses to avoid detection. It takes a few days, but the program finds a few suspicious glitches on the errant venture. When the task force arrives on the Star Destroyer, they team up with Leia and Corran, hunting for the Dark Jedi. They ambush Alima in one of the ship's long corridors. Leia attacks, driving the Twi'lek back toward Corran. But Alima is slippery. She evades the trap, flees to the hangar bay, steals Captain Levant's ship, and escapes. Now, stranded on the errant venture, Levant offers to give Han, Leia, and Lando the information she provided to their son Jason, if they get her a new ship. Lando agrees, and Levant tells the group the location of where the rebels are electing their supreme commander, on a resort satellite orbiting the remote gas giant called Galater 8.
Jason and Lumaya arrive on Galater 8 before the rebel forces. They set an ambush, hiding their forces in the atmosphere of the gas giant to avoid detection. The trap is set, but not for the rebels. It turns out, the rebels expected the Galactic Alliance, and their new Supreme Commander, Tur Fanir, set his own trap for Jason. The rebels attack, pounding the small Galactic Alliance fleet. Jason uses the Force to call the Jedi for reinforcements. Luke, Leia, Mara, and Corran all hear the call, and despite everything Jason's done over the last few months, they head to Galater 8 to help.
The Battle of Galater 8 rages with rebels landing troops on the resort satellite. It's hand-to-hand, close combat. The fighting is fierce, with neither side gaining much of an advantage. Luke, Leia, Han, and Mara arrive to save Jason, or more specifically, to stop Lumaya. Luke finds the Sith Lady and ignites his lightsaber, but his former girlfriend refuses to fight. She tells Luke she's not out for revenge against him or his son. She just wants peace in the galaxy. Lumaya offers Luke her hand. He touches it and finds no deception. Lumaya is telling the truth. Suddenly, a shuttle slams into the side of the station, tearing open the hull. The air starts leaking out of the station. Han, Leia, and Luke turn to find Jason, and watch in horror as he turns and flees, leaving them to their fate. Luckily, our heroes make it back to their ship and escape the resort. The story ends on the Anakin solo. Lumaya tells Jason about Ben saving the girl on Ziost and says he isn't worthy of being a Sith apprentice. When Lumaya leaves, Jason wonders if Ben will need to be one of his sacrifices in order to become a Sith Lord. But no, Jason is certain he'll need to kill his parents. It's time for the galaxy to be rid of Han and Leia Solo.
Time to take a break. When we return, Jay and I talk more about Exile by Aaron Alston. I'm Aaron Moats. Stay tuned. You're listening to the Star Wars Legends Lounge. Thank you for listening to the Star Wars Legends Lounge, where we celebrate the books from Star Wars Legends. But let me suggest a book from Star Wars canon. Force Collector is the story of Kar Nuke Sin, who's just a typical teenager, except whenever he touches an object, he receives a vision. His parents believe Kar is sick, but his grandmother has a different idea. She thinks Kar is touched by the Force. Kar runs off to find the truth about the Force and about the mysterious people called the Jedi. Will he learn the answers to his questions? Or will Kar be stopped by the First Order? Check out Force Collector by Kevin Shinnick. Welcome back to the Star Wars Legends Lounge, the show that celebrates the books from Star Wars Legends. I'm Aaron Moats, and today, Jay and I are discussing the Star Wars Legends novel, Exile, by Aaron Alston, the fourth book in the Legacy of the Force series. Well, Jay, it's your first time on the show for the Legacy of the Force series, and you and I had exchanged a few emails about when setting up for this episode, and one of the things you mentioned is that your opinion of Jason's journey toward the dark side of the Force is more logical for Jason's character than the way Kat and Scott and myself talked about it in the first 3 episodes we did in the series. So, we're always about letting people share their opinions here on this show. So go ahead, Jay. Why, in your opinion, does this make sense for Jason's character?
Well, you actually use the right word. It's the logic portion, right? I totally agree with you that Jason is broken. But when we look back at him at the New Jedi Order, he was the kid that couldn't make a decision. He tried to think through every single possibility, and it would always leave him paralyzed. Until he was forced by Vajir and the Yuzet Vong to act. And one of those actions was his brother got killed. He is now in his 30s. He hasn't dealt with that trauma. And they talk about it all the time, how he's exemplified this fact in the Force that he can hide from everybody. No one can feel him in the Force. And that's because he's completely detached from his emotions. He is still doing everything in a logical way. He even looked at, I can use the Sith teachings because it's not how I use them, it's just education. I can use them the right way.
So this is similar to the 5 years that we had spoken about earlier in the show. This is more of the 5 years. This is like an extension of those 5 years where he toured the galaxy looking at how other Force users use the Force.
Exactly. And he is, yes, he's very powerful. He knows different techniques than every other Jedi out there. but he is constantly just doing the logical thing. He's not looking at the moral ramifications. He's not looking at the emotional ramifications. He's mapping out and using one of the abilities he's learned to examine the future and pick the quote unquote right path, right? He's not worried about the morality of it, and he's he's literally basing everything in logic. And when I read this time through, it kind of reminded me of the scientists who developed the nuclear bomb. They were following the science. They weren't looking at the moral implications of can they or should they do this. It was always just can I do this? And I think Jason's in the same thing. Right now I can do this, so I'm going to do this. But he's not looking at how it's affecting his family, how it affects governments, because he's also surrounded by a bunch of people that are praising him for what he's doing.
So I can see that point of view at the beginning of the series. Now we're 4 books in, and numerous times as Jason is trying to become more powerful in the dark side of the Force, his teacher Lumaya keeps telling him he needs to use his emotions.
Mm-hmm.
How does Jason justify using his emotions more and more with his logical side that says he needs to learn this use of the Force for the greater good?
Because I think this is the trauma that's been sitting with him for so long that even I think what's happening is he's breaking. He's put up those walls for so long that the dam is starting to break and everything's coming out, right? We see, you know, his actions in the interrogation, right? He wasn't getting where he wanted logically, so he snapped and got really angry, right? We see even at the end of this book where he comes to the conclusion that Han and Leia need to be killed because they always left him as a kid. They were willing to ship him off all the time and not be actual parents and constantly put him in harm's way. This is all stuff that has been a lifelong thing that he's walled up, and the floodgates are just now opening.
And now he wants to protect his daughter. He wants to protect the woman he loves, even though that woman has made it clear that they cannot be together, and she cannot ever let it be known that that Jason is the father of her child. So those emotions have to be pulling him apart as well.
Yeah, and look at how many times he self speaks to himself that he can't let Lumaya know how he feels about them, right? He's buried those feelings so deep that he doesn't even want to acknowledge them, right? Because it could be a security risk for them. But at the same time, this is just following that pattern of I'm separating myself from my emotions. I'm just doing what makes sense. It makes sense that no one knows he's the father of his child. It makes sense that she grows up without really knowing who he is. You know, they have the odd visit, but I don't even think his daughter really knows that Jason is her dad.
No, that she never, at least at this point in the series, has never let it be known that, well, I shouldn't say let it be known. She has never recognized him as a father.
So so obviously he cherishes the time that he gets, but when he leaves those meetings that are happening years apart, like months apart,
At least months.
that's got to be tearing him up inside every single time, right? So it's just adding to that wound that's not healing, right? He wants to be loved, he wants to be accepted. You know, one of the person that he was probably closest to aside from Jaina is gone, and he feels it was his fault. You know, in the Killick series, I know he also kind of manipulated Jaina, and that's why she's not talking to him anymore. And the family is seeing him doing these actions and going, well, like they can't understand why, but none of them are talking about like he after the and he grew up in a war, like and then he disappeared for 5 years, and no one knows really what he did.
All right, I can see that. I can see that. Well, thanks for explaining why you think that the way Jason is acting is more logical than what myself or Scott or Kat thought.
Yeah, absolutely.
So let's talk about this book specifically. One of the major plots in this book is Jason testing Ben. Lumaya tells Jason he needs to figure out who his apprentice is going to be because, as we know, there are always two Sith. So, Jason sets up a test for Ben to go find this amulet. And clearly, after Jason sets off the test, Lumaya completely manipulates the test. Basically, Lumaya does not believe Ben is worthy to be Jason's apprentice, but if he can handle himself like a Sith, then maybe Lumaya was mistaken. What do you think of the test as it was set, and what do you think of the way Ben succeeded in returning the amulet to Jason on Coruscant?
I think Maya was even behind it before. Um, like I think she probably mentioned it to Jason in the first place to send him for this artifact. And I think Lumaya, what her intention was, one, if he succeeds, then he's possibly proved himself as a worthy apprentice. But, if an accident happens,
Then that means Ben wasn't worthy. If Ben can't make it back, if Ben dies, then that means he was not worthy to be Jason's apprentice.
and she also gets that revenge that she claims she's not necessarily trying to garner against Luke. This was a happy accident where he was sent on a mission and died on his mission. She had nothing to do with it.
Sure, it's killing two birds with one stone.
Yeah.
Now, Ben does succeed. Ben makes it back. But still, Lumaya believes he's unworthy, mainly because Ben's conscience will not allow him to abandon this young girl who, the way she's described, is probably around, what, 5 or 6, maybe at the most 8 years old?
Yeah, I'd definitely say in that 5 to 8 year old bracket.
Right. If he has the makings of a Sith apprentice, in her way of thinking, once her father dies and Ben grabs the amulet, he simply should have walked back to his Y Wing right then and there, taken off, and flown back to Coruscant. But Ben's a good boy. Ben can't leave this young girl to her fate. So, in Lumaya's way of thinking, that means Ben can't do what needs to be done in all situations.
Yeah, I would agree with that. And I mean, we also do see Ben sort of walk away at first. And it was in sort of his inner monologue where he realized that what he was doing was very similar to what Jason had been doing, and he's like, this is wrong. I think this is actually a big epiphany moment for Ben, where he's starting to understand that, his cousin, his mentor, his best friend, his older brother is not doing things the way they should be happening.
And we first saw that in the second book in the series with the interrogation of Aileen.
Hmm. But, again, that he's in that instance too, though, he's never really been involved in a military. Like, he doesn't understand. He does see, the officer who kind of freaks out and is like, this is wrong, you shouldn't have done that.
Right.
But at the same time, like, this is a 13-year-old kid. This is all brand new to him. He doesn't know what's going on, right? He's told to follow orders. That's what he's trying to do. He's trying to be the good soldier, you know, over someone that he doesn't realize is manipulating him.
So, Ben succeeds. Jason, on some level, is proud of him, but Lumaya reiterates that he's not worthy. And she believes that Jason will need to kill Ben, that will be his sacrifice. But she does say, the Force will let you know. And at this point, the Force is not telling Jason to kill Ben. He seems to believe that the Force is pointing him to his parents, Han and Leia. That's the other main plot of this story, is Han and Leia on the run. They betrayed Corellia, so they can't go back there. Eventually, they meet up in this story with Wedge, Corran, Wedge's wife Iella, Corran's wife Mirax, and the whole happy gang ends up on the errant venture. They have now decided that this is going to be their center of operations because Leia has come to believe that there's more going on here than just the Galactic Alliance and the confederation of planets that are joining up with Corellia to fight back against the Galactic Alliance. What is it you think Leia is looking for?
I don't know if she actually knows what she's looking for. I think she's just been in the political arena for so long and through numerous different wars that things just aren't adding up for her, that things are happening too quickly, without some outside source sort of pushing them, pushing these factors towards each other. Like Leia even realizes that, like, Jason's pretty easy to manipulate at this point, where, you know, she's like, if I just get Luke to make a recommendation that the errant venture would be terrible to cross the Galactic Alliance um, uh, line, he'll approve it immediately just to basically say F you to Luke. So I think she's just seeing her years in the political arena, I think, are just she's no she does she's noticing something that is saying there's other factors here that are pushing this, that it's just not this cut and dry, and she's had information from both sides.
So you're right, of course. There is something bigger going on. I guess I should say Leia is right, of course, even though she doesn't know what it is. And what it is Lumaya taking advantage of the situation to try to help Jacen Solo elevate himself to becoming a Sith Lord and thus take control of the known galaxy. Very much like the Clone Wars. It's very much a Sith manipulating two factions into a war so that he can gain more and more emergency powers. I guess this is one of those examples of George Lucas saying it's like poetry. It rhymes, because this, to me, is very reminiscent of the prequel films.
Well, it absolutely is. And um, I mean, I, I actually saw an interview with George Lucas earlier today with James Cameron, and talking about how, and I feel like this has probably come up within like the last year, but just talking about how um, government is slipping closer and closer to that empire that is so depicted in his films. And he's like, yeah, we didn't learn, we didn't take example from like the British, the Romans, the like all these empires that got to the top and ultimately failed. And I think that's what's happening here in this book, is that, or in these books, is that we're watching it happen again, right? But enough of the universe has, I don't want to say forgotten, moved past that, had other giant wars, that it seems like it was something that happened a long, long time ago.
And they don't want to believe that it will happen again.
Yeah, right. They've created laws and rules that will prevent that from happening again. But there's only a select few people that, at the end of the day, are probably still around, that even remember the Clone Wars. Like, and it's kind of like that right now. Like, we're in an era now where a lot of our veterans from World War II aren't here anymore. When they teach that in school, we're getting the point where it's almost 100 years ago.
Yeah, it's no longer, there's fewer and fewer and fewer first-hand accounts. Now it's all second and third hand.
It's second and third hand, but 100 years ago seems like a really long time. It's still recent history, but you know, it's much different from when my kids hear about it than when I learned about it.
So before we end our discussion, one last thing. So I've said this is like the third time that I've read this series. I remember reading it when it was first published, and I remember reading it again about 15, 16 years ago. I never picked up on the foreshadowing in the discussion that Zek, Jag, and Jaina have, talking about what Sword of the Jedi means for Jaina. Because Jaina has been confused ever since Luke said those words way back in the New Jedi Order, when Jaina was elevated to Jedi Knight, calling her the Sword of the Jedi, saying that she was going to have a restless life, that she was always going to stand alone, but to take heart in the fact that all of her sacrifices would mean that life could be good for other people. And Jag says, well, the sword is a weapon. Maybe that means you're going to be a weapon against the Sith. And I don't know why the first two times I read this book, because I was in my 20s when I read this book the first two times. I don't know why I never picked up on that. But I picked up on it this time. Had you picked up on it before? Or I know you say you don't really remember reading it the first time, but did you pick up on it this time when you were reading it? And is that because of, like me, you know where this series is going?
I think there's a little part of me that it knows that, and it's stood out for me. But I think it's also because we read the New Jedi Order, very, very recently and discussed it. So I think there was part of my brain that was like, hey, this is kind of a callback plus moving that idea forward that, hasn't really shifted in what, 15 years?
Yeah.
So yeah, I think it'll be really interesting to see how the sword is forged
Sure.
going forward.
I would like to know, listeners, for those of you who are either reading Legacy of the Force for the first time or have read Legacy of the Force previously, the first time you were reading this series, did you pick up on that discussion? Because it wasn't a long discussion. It was only, what, like 3 pages,
Yeah,
if
something
that?
like that.
And a lot of it dealt with how both Jag and Zek had romantic feelings at some point in time with Jaina. Now they don't. And now, when they did talk about their romantic feelings with Jaina, she didn't want any. But now that they don't think of her romantically, she's a little upset that they no longer think of her that way. And
And this whole discussion was also happening while they were trying to one up each other and, like chin ups and pull ups and push ups with no shirts on. And
exactly,
yeah,
exactly. It was a very 80s movie scene.
yeah, it was funny.
But yeah, so maybe she is a weapon against the Sith. Listener, just keep that in the back of your mind as we go forward in this series. Well, Jay, it's almost time to go, but before we do, we have another Star Wars character grouping to share with everyone. It's from Mark, who sent in his ideal Star Wars road trip crew. Jay, will you please share Mark's list with us?
I will. First off, Mark says we're all going to be in the Razor Crest because it's his favorite ship in Star Wars. You know what? I'm pretty liking that ship too, so I'm down with that.
It is. It's the Winnebago of Star Wars.
Yeah,
Everyone can fit
you
in
know
it.
what? But it's just one of those ships that it's got such a unique design, and I think it's fantastic. And I was sad when they blew it up.
I got it right back there in Lego form. Right back there.
Perfect. And our driver is going to be Han Solo, naturally, because he wouldn't be afraid of the navigator's advice. Navigation is Anakin Skywalker, as he knows all the shortcuts and can get us to each destination fastest. On music is Bo-Katan Kryze, because her theme song is fantastic. And snacks are Dexter Jetster, because he can bring his diner food. That's a good call right there.
Oh, you always need the greasiest diner food whenever you're going on a long trip. Just give me some scrambled eggs and bacon, maybe a grilled cheese sandwich, just anything greasy.
And he can keep, everyone fed pretty quick with those 4 arms
Oh,
too.
absolutely.
So, uh, temperature control is Queel from the first season of The Mandalorian, because he will always try to find the temperature that everyone can agree on. And the backseat driver is Grand Admiral Thrawn, because it would lead to some very interesting comments and arguments about the decisions that Han and Anakin make.
Great list, Mark. Thank you very much for sharing that with Jay and me today. Listener, if you have a Star Wars character group you'd like to share, or if you have a question, an opinion, a comment, or if you disagree with something that I've said on the show, you can send me an email at swlegendslounge@gmail.com or send me a message on Twitter, Instagram, or Blue Sky at swlegendslounge. Jay, it's time to wrap up. Thank you very much for joining me today.
Thanks for having me, Aaron. I'm sorry that I wasn't able to make it for the first book, like we had planned, but I was actually really excited that Scott got to do that because I remember that was the book that you gave him for his Christmas present. So I'm really glad that he was able to step up and do that. Um, but yeah, I can't wait to see where the rest of the series goes. And
Jay, how do you and your family enjoy the baseball playoffs? Are you all just going to make a night of it when Toronto plays? You're going to sit around the television, just you and Beth? Are the kids going to be there? What's it like rooting for the Jays up north of the wall?
Well, today for the final game, I had my jersey on. I had the jersey on my dog. I asked my kids to get their Blue Jays gear on, and one of them did. So that's probably what's going to be happening going forward. I'm looking very forward to Saturday. I know I will be tuning in to every game. Um, whether I lose sleep or not, I will, the last time the Jays were in this position back in 2015, I was, listening to it on my phone at work. I was listening to it in the car, trying to watch it whenever I could. I had my Jays t-shirts underneath my work uniform every day. It's probably going to be the same thing this time around. And, you know, hopefully my kids sit down and watch it with us, and Beth will be she'll watch the game, but she's also got schoolwork to do, so it'll kind of be on in the background.
In Canada, can everyone in the nation still watch all the Blue Jays games? I know at one point you could.
Yeah, I believe so, because it's owned by um the broadcaster is called Sportsnet, and their parent company is Rogers Communication, which is an owner of the Blue Jays. So there, for the Blue Jays, there is no blackout for their games, with the exception of the MLB games that are under contract to Apple TV. So that happens about one. It's usually one Friday every month. Um,
I always thought that was pretty cool that even if you were all the way in the east at St. John's or all the way out west in Vancouver, everyone in the nation could watch the Blue Jays games when they were on.
yeah,
That always seemed cool to me.
I think, and it's one of those things I would say is very unique because the Blue Jays are the only team in Canada,
Sure.
right?
Yeah, the Expos aren't there anymore.
Yeah, the Expos aren't there anymore, and so and even the players now, because there was a time where a lot of the players would come here and be like, "Oh man, I don't want to go to Toronto," but the word of mouth from players that have played here and left is like it's like nowhere else you've ever played. The stadium, every game is around 40,000 fans.
Yeah, and they're a national team. You have the
Yeah,
entire nation behind you.
yeah. So, in recent years, it's funny to see like when they go to Seattle, they all it's almost become a home game. It's in Seattle, but you get all the West Coasters that head down to Seattle to watch the games. So there's more Jays fans than Seattle fans when the Jays play.
Yeah, they all drive down from Vancouver and Victoria.
Yeah. So, and that's wild to see now that like, I've been a baseball fan for a while, and I can remember, you know, you would never wear a Blue Jay jersey at Fenway Park. That was a good way to get, your butt kicked and the jersey ripped off your back. Now there's Jays jerseys there every single game.
Well, hopefully, Jay, by the time this episode publishes, Toronto has won its first postseason games and are getting ready for the ALCS.
That would be fantastic. Um, Saturday come fast enough.
Coming up on the next episode, Kat is back in the seat. She'll join me to talk about the fifth book in the Legacy of the Force series, Sacrifice by Karen Travis. You can join us for that episode coming out on October 17th. Thank you so much for listening to the Star Wars Legends Lounge today. I'm Aaron Motes. May the Force be with you. And remember, there's always a bit of truth in Legends.